Hi, everybody. We're going to talk, we're starting on this area in your textbook called Germ Theory of Disease, but I always like to first talk about the importance of microbes because I don't want it to get lost in all the information about how bacteria can cause disease or microbes can cause disease. That microbes also are super important, and without them, we would not be here today. So life is dependent on microbes. The life that you are living now is only able to be lived because of microorganisms. Nitrogen fixation is an example of an activity that microbes do that helps plants to take in nitrogen so that they can grow properly. Oxygen production. Without microbes, the atmosphere would not be favorable to animals at all. So we need oxygen to survive. And before the first photosynthetic bacteria were here, the earth did not have oxygen. Oxygen is actually considered a very highly toxic substance, and so many microbes can't even use oxygen, and a lot of them can't survive in the presence of oxygen. Microbes also degrade materials, so they're important in breaking down waste products like organic matter, dead leaves, fecal matter, organisms that are degrading in the woods when they die. Microbes help to break them down so that we don't live in that environment with a bunch of poop and everything. So this is just showing nitrogen fixation. This is actually a figure from a Pearson textbook that just shows nitrogen fixation. Nitrogen in the atmosphere is known as nitrogen gas, and we can't use nitrogen gas, or plants can't use nitrogen gas. About 78% of our atmosphere is nitrogen, but it's in an unusable form. So we have bacteria that live in the roots of our plants that take in that nitrogen and convert it to a form that our cells, not our cells, that plant cells can use, known as ammonia. So ammonia then is able to be taken in by the plants, and the plants can grow and utilize the ammonia. Then nitrifying bacteria can take that ammonia and convert it into nitrates. Nitrates then can be broken down by denitrifying bacteria back to nitrogen gas. Oh, another thing that you're seeing there is animals and plants that die can be broken down by detritivores. Microbes can be detritivores. Also, there's fungi that are detritivores, and even some helminths that are detritivores. And they can break down organic waste into ammonia again, and ammonia can then be converted to nitrates and or be denitrified back to nitrogen gas. Bacteria also produce oxygen, produce oxygen here when they photosynthesize. So oxygen is a waste product of photosynthesis and can be released to the environment as, well, oxygen gas. Carbon dioxide is taken in, so you can get rid of carbon dioxide via photosynthesis. Carbohydrates then that the plant produces and the oxygen that the plant produces can be used in aerobic cell respiration, where we produce energy. So it all ties together. But that's not all they do. They also are really important in producing foods. So we use microorganisms to bake bread, to produce beer, to produce yogurt, so fermentation in the process of yogurt production, or cheeses. We use it in biodegradation. So we use microbes to degrade organic materials like oil spills. and bioremediation, where we are using microbes to decay or get rid of pollutants in the environment. So all of that, I always like to remind you of that before we actually talk about the germ theory. And the reason I do that is because now we're going to talk about how dangerous and deadly microbes are. But remember, before we talk about how deadly they are, that they are important, and without them we would not be here. So microbes are super important, but they also can be deadly. They can be used in bioterrorism. They can be used as weapons. And they have killed more individuals than our world wars even killed. So they're very dangerous. And so let's talk about the germ theory of disease. And so this theory basically states that diseases result from microbial infection, which makes sense, right? A disease comes from a microbe, like bacteria or a virus. Semmelweis noted that women who gave birth in hospitals with doctors and students had a 10 to 20% mortality rate, whereas women who gave birth in maternity wards with midwives had a 1% mortality rate. And so he also noted that, so in the 1800s, doctors, they wore their work basically on their sleeve. And so they would wear their white jackets into the different rooms when they were seeing their patients. These white jackets would get dirty with time, and they didn't wash them because they were kind of, it was like a badge of honor. I saved, so-and-so's life. This is his blood. Here's someone else's blood. Here's someone else's blood. These are all surgeries I've done, or this is all stuff I've done. So back in the early 1800s, people still weren't sure that microbes were causing disease. People weren't sure that that living things even came from other living things. They were still, hypothesizing or living by that spontaneous generation theory, which was debunked. But Semmelweis noticed this, and he decided that he didn't know what was going on, but he noticed that midwives tended to wash their hands more often and use clean water. They would boil water, sterilize the water, while doctors had, their students coming in, so there was a lot more people around, more hands touching everything, and there was more deaths. So he implemented hand washing with chlorinated lime water, and the mortality rate in the hospitals dropped down. When you have midwives, there's one midwife that's delivering your child. She is the only one, and she's washing her hands and keeping everything clean. When you have multiple students and doctors coming in and out of rooms, there's multiple chances for mom or infant to die. Oh, sorry. Oh my gosh. Okay. Stop. Okay. So Joseph Lister then noted that there was a 50% mortality rate in surgical patients. And so he started looking at, that's totally spelled incorrectly, I noticed. He noted that if people started to use some aseptic measures to keep the environment more clean, people would survive better. And so he implemented hand washing, and he started cleaning up the surgical rooms. And so he would use a carboxylic acid chamber spray, and he would just kind of spray the environment. And this disinfectant would be sprayed throughout the surgery on the patient, as well as prior to surgery on all the instruments. This decreased the death toll in the hospitals for people who are having surgeries. Agostino Bassi, this is, so look at the time frame. This is before we knew that microbes even potentially could cause disease. We hadn't, we didn't know really anything. He demonstrated that silkworm disease was likely caused by a fungal infection. And he did this because he was looking at his silkworms and he noticed that some of them had a fungal coat on, basically, and that was killing them. And even if he had a worm that didn't have the fungus, in with a worm that did have the fungus, that the worm that was healthy would get sick and get that fungal infection. If he cleaned the worms and separated them, the worms that didn't have the fungus in their tank did not get the infection. And so he said, I don't think these guys are getting sick from some random air, but the fungus that's on one of my worms is getting to my other worms somehow, even if I separate them. But if I clean them when I separate them, then they seem to not have a problem. So there was some microscopic structure, which we know now are the spores from the fungus, that is causing the infection. Pasteur documented that wine spoilage was likely due to microbes. And he noted that microbes existed using that swan neck experiment. But the microbes that fermented the wine and caused wine spoilage were different than the microbes that fermented wine and produced sweetness or sugars. So there was different types of fermenters out there. And then John Snow, he is the father of epidemiology, and he conducted studies demonstrating that contamination of a water source was what was transmitting a disease known as cholera. So this was the first epidemiological study. And he basically said, if you shut that water source down, make people go somewhere else for water, they will start living. This disease will go away. And it did. It was and so I will say, there are animations here, but I'm not going to play them right now. You can always look up these animations, though. They're great animations that give a little bit more information about the individuals. All right, I'm going to stop here because this has been 13 minutes. I know that it seems like I'm talking a lot and not getting through a lot of slides, but this has a lot of history and information, so this chapter will likely be a little bit longer than most of the other chapters. Okay, all right, bye.